The theater of war has expanded in the Middle East, with hostilities between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon intensifying. After the pager and walkie-talkie explosions in Beirut, Israel and Hezbollah have traded new attacks. The two-day bombing campaign by Israel has resulted in over 500 deaths in Lebanon. The fresh wave of attacks has also forced thousands of people to get displaced, with many fleeing Israeli bombardment and heading north towards Beirut. Hezbollah today launched a ballistic missile at Tel Aviv in a further escalation in conflict. The Israeli military says it intercepted the surface-to-surface missile, in the morning, adding that there were no reports of casualties or damage. Yesterday, the Israeli military claimed that it has killed Ibrahim Mohammad Kabisi, a top commander with Hezbollah's missile and rocket unit, in an airstrike in Beirut. But the larger question and the worry is that will this escalation result in an all-out and wider conflict in the region?
You're watching the News Hour at 10. Debate number 2 on Times Now, Super Prime Time.
It's a very sensitive time in the Middle East. Not only are we talking about what we've been seeing for months happen between Israel as well as Palestine, but we're also seeing, of course, a potential and the conflict in terms of what's taking place between Israel and Lebanon more recently. To talk about this situation in the Middle East, we are joined by Israel's ambassador to India, Reuven Azar, who's with us here in our studio. Firstly, thank you so much, Mr. Reuven, for joining us here in our studio. And Ambassador Azar, let me begin by asking you that the recent escalation of conflicts, how is Israel managing its military strategy while simultaneously facing intense confrontations with both Hamas as well as Hezbollah?
Well, thank you, Madhav, for this interview. What Israel is now concentrating in, after it has basically defeated Hamas militarily in the south, is trying to get stability back to the north. As you know, Hezbollah, in an unprovoked way, attacked Israel on the 8th of October, following the terrible, atrocious attack of Hamas. And since then, it has constantly firing rockets and missiles, about 9,000, rockets and missiles being fired at Israel since then. And Israel wants to bring this to a stop. So we try diplomatically. We use the services of our good friends, the Americans. They tried to convince the Lebanese government to get an implementation of UN Security Council 1701 that basically says that Hezbollah has to withdraw from the border area. Unfortunately, Hezbollah has refused. And therefore, we have planned this operation to put pressure on Hezbollah to do what it is required to do, not only by Israel, but also by the international community. And therefore, we are intensifying now the operations, and we are hitting those rockets and missiles, tens of thousands of them, that have been accumulated by Hezbollah, and they have been concealed in civilian homes of people in villages in the south. So we have attacked about 1,700 targets only in the 48 hours that passed, because we are determined to remove this threat from our country.
Right. But how does Israel react to the reports that have been coming in that, you know, the allegations of being involved in pager and walkie-talkie explosions in Lebanon? Well, we haven't seen any formal statement come in. What is Israel's position on all of these explosions?
Well, look, we are not going to comment on different tactics that are being used or by identified entities. What is important for us is to send a very clear message to the terrorists that they will not be impuned, that they cannot continue firing against Israel without bearing the consequences. And now they are bearing the consequences.
Because, you know, we've seen, for instance, in response to the claims that have come in from the side of Hezbollah, Lebanon, that have said Israel is responsible for these explosions. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant has said that this is a new phase in the conflict with Hezbollah. So what is this new phase, and how will this, be looked at internationally in terms of Israel's approach?
Well, our approach says that we are not interested in war, that this actually war was imposed on us by Hezbollah by attacking our sovereign territory. So after months of trying to solve this diplomatically, we have taken a decision to escalate in order to give the message to Hezbollah that they cannot continue with this kind of aggression. And we have a plan. We are not going to disclose the plan and they will have to suffer the consequences of their actions unless they withdraw. And this is what we want to achieve.
All right. Because, are we looking at a situation where, you've obviously caused a huge amount of damage as far as Hezbollah is concerned. Are we looking at a situation where there is a possibility of some kind of a peace deal, of an understanding that could perhaps take place in that region? Because we've seen a very long and protracted war in Gaza. Are we looking at a potentially long and protracted war in Lebanon as well? Or is there some possibility of a peace deal being struck over there?
Well, first of all, we are not, we don't have any interest in prolonging any wars, because we are a democracy and we thrive when there is peace. We don't have any benefit of going into wars. These wars have been basically, bestowed on us, and we have to create a situation in which we can restore stability. Now, with Hamas, it's complicated, not only because it's a densely urban population and the Hamas terrorist organization has been using the urban, densely populated areas as human shields, and they've been breaching any possible norm of humanity in order to inflict damage, taking the civilians hostages, committing war crimes, and taking the hostages. So we have a dilemma with the hostages. We wanted to reach a deal that was sponsored by the United States and the UN Security Council. Hamas refused this deal, and therefore war there is continuing. We want to reach a situation in Lebanon in which we can restore peace as soon as possible. The only thing that has to happen is that Hezbollah forces will implement what the world is demanding from them, to implement the UN Security Council Resolution 1701 and get them to withdraw from the border, so our civilian population that we have evacuated from there 11 months ago, 70,000 people that have left their homes, so they can safely return to their homes.
Right. And that's the point I was about to come to, because as far as the 7th October attack by Hamas is concerned, as per media reports, the terror group still holds 101 hostages, including 97 of the 251 that were captured on the 7th of October. And given this situation, there are many who are questioning whether, military offensive is the best way forward, whether diplomacy is the best way forward, and what really is the solution, because, there will be continued war, there will be continued hostages if the current situation continues, is a fear that some have expressed.
Well, Madhav, the most important thing, if we want to survive in our region, is not to surrender to terrorists. So they are trying to extort from us a situation in which they will be able to rearm and regroup with the help of this bargaining chip that they have, which is the hostages. Okay? And frankly speaking, we are in a dilemma because, for us, bringing back our hostages is very important. So we are in a situation in which we have defined, in a very, I think, prudent way, two goals for this operation. The first is to bring the hostages home, but also to degrade the military capabilities of Hamas and not to allow the rearming and regrouping. So we have to have a combination of negotiations and military operation, and this is exactly what we're doing. It might take time. There were hostage situations that took years. If I have to remind you, the American hostages that were taken by the Iranian regime in the revolution. This, by the way, is the regime that is sponsoring all these terrorists, that is feeding them with training, with money, with sophisticated weapons of a degree that even conventional armies don't have. So this situation in the region in which Iran is actually bursting into the vacuum that was created following the collapse of the Arab state system is something that is very precarious and has implications not only on us, but on the entire world. We are seeing now Iranian missiles landing in Europe. Okay? So anybody that is concerned about this situation, I think, has to join forces in order to put pressure on these radicals to stop the regression so we can restore stability in our region.
Right. There are a lot of points in what you have just said as far as Iran's role is concerned. I'm going to come to Iran's role in just a minute, because you also mentioned diplomacy and conventional warfare. But many are saying that the warfare has now reached another level when it comes to technology, particularly with these exploding devices. And what is the role that technology is going to play as far as this war is concerned is a concern that many have expressed. And of course, as somebody who has played a role in national security in Israel, what is your view on the role that technology is going to play from here on?
Well, you know, the challenge that we have is that we are fighting an asymmetric war, which the aggressors are using methods that are completely unconventional in the sense that they don't respect the rules of engagement, okay? So they are, you know, utilizing hospitals as launch pads for missiles. They are embedding themselves in humanitarian areas, in school. They're operating, you know, transporting their terrorists in ambulances. So we are fighting this asymmetric war, and the question is, what is our way out of it, okay? We don't want to adopt this norm, this lack of norms that the terrorists have. So we have to think outside the box on how we are going to neutralize them, how we are going to actually come victorious when it comes to this struggle that we're having. And therefore, yes, there are new technologies. We are using new technologies to defend ourselves, like, for example, with the production of the anti-missile batteries, anti-drone batteries, and when it comes to cyber activity and many other technologies that must be used if you want to overcome the challenge that is coming from terrorist organizations that are also advanced technologically.
Right. You know, now there's a couple of aspects that you refer to. You refer to the role of Iran itself, and that's, of course, a huge concern at this point of time, because there are many who are saying that if this kind of impact, and you mentioned over 1,500 rockets that were fired, there are those who believe that perhaps this response is disproportionate, and if Iran also and other parts of the Middle East get involved, then that this could actually become a part of a much wider conflict in the Middle East. And that's something that nobody wants, because you already have a war on two fronts, and you'll be perhaps opening up more fronts. How do you look at the possibility of this becoming a wider conflict?
Well, I'll give you another angle of looking at this, Madhav. Iran is like an octopus. They are the head of the octopus, and they have developed all these tentacles in the region, okay? The Houthis in Yemen, the militias in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, in the Palestinian territories. And their aim is basically to choke the region, to create a situation in which they become hegemonous in this region. And the only way of dealing with that is by cutting these tentacles or by attacking the octopus itself. At this point in time, because of the natural size of our defense forces, we are gradually going from tentacle to tentacle. Now, of course, we would prefer a situation in which there would be a bigger coalition of countries that are feeling threatened by Iran, that actually would put pressure on the octopus itself. Because then a change of policy of this radical regime would create a situation in which we can achieve stability. Now, we are seeing some cooperation, fortunately, that is happening. And we saw the manifestation of that on the 13th of April, when air forces of countries in the region worked in coordination to foil a barrage, unprecedented barrage of 300 missiles, rockets, and ballistic missiles that were fired from Iran at Israel. This is an important building block in the new architecture of security in the region that will generate political stability and, hopefully, after this war, also economic stability and prosperity. So the interests of the countries that are being attacked by Iran, I think, are converging, and we're seeing in a more concentrated way a prospect and a horizon of creating stability in the region. But we have to be resolved. We have to show resolve, and we have to defeat the terrorists that are attacking us if we want to live in peace in our region.
But, you know, internationally, beyond the region itself, is that really happening? Because we're looking at a situation where US President Joe Biden has recently called for de-escalation of violence between, Israel and Hezbollah. He has called for de-escalation of the clashes. He's also said that US doesn't want an all-out war. He's urged for a diplomatic solution. And not only US, but Turkey, EU, Iraq, Egypt have also raised similar concerns over a potential escalation. So how do you view this? Because is there a global shift in the perception that perhaps is not currently in Israel's favor, as a concern that some experts have also been?
Well, we are not concerned from that. We actually welcome the American efforts to use diplomacy. But, you know, diplomacy can only work when there is an outcome on the ground. When the terrorists feel that they have the stronger hand, there's no diplomacy that is going to stop them. So when diplomacy fails, that's the time when military force has to be used. And in order to seize the use of military force, diplomacy has to play a role again. So we are determined to defeat those that are attacking us, and we are sure that with the diplomatic efforts coming from the United States and other countries, we'll be able to achieve arrangements, long-term arrangements that are going to secure stability for the long term.
Right. Also, PM Modi recently met Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas on the sidelines of the UNGA session in New York. What's Israel's perspective on this? Because recently we've seen India abstain on a vote when it came to Israel. It was a UNGA resolution specifically against Israel. How do you see this developing, and how do you see this particular development?
Well, we appreciate very much the fact that India has supported our right to self-defense and condemned the atrocious terrorist attacks on the 7th of October. And we are happy that India didn't join this outrageous resolution that enjoys a kind of automatic majority in the UN because of the distorted way in which this organization is being built, which gives automatic majority to a certain group of countries. So there are some countries that are acting hypocritically. They know that this resolution doesn't deserve to be approved, but they vote for it. India didn't do so, and this is something that we appreciate very much. That shows the friendship that we have between our countries. I think that India is playing a very positive role when it comes to promoting stability in our region, because it is offering their hand in creating these partnerships that will allow our economies to be developed, that will allow connectivity between different parts of the world, that is going to turn West Asia, the Middle East, into a corridor of stability and connectivity. This is what we want to achieve.
What's the role you see India playing in the Middle East?
Well, India is a major partner of countries in the region, because it is becoming not only a growing power, but a technological and a trade hub and a manufacturing hub that is going to supply solutions to many challenges that we have, whether it be with supply chains, whether it be in supporting the economies of the region. And therefore, many countries are tempted to cooperate with India more and more, including, of course, the State of Israel, but also our neighbors.
But do you see this economic help translate into India also playing a role in terms of perhaps playing a role of ensuring peace in the Middle East as well?
Absolutely, because there are many solutions that we can achieve together with India. You know, many, for example, startups and technological companies in Israel want to come to India to commercialize their solution, to manufacture here. There are infrastructure projects that we want to build in Israel, and we want to benefit from Indian companies that have all the requirements that are needed in order to build these projects. And we are not the only ones. You know, there are countries in the region like the UAE, like Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Egypt, Jordan. They are all part of this effort to create peace in the region, and they are all willing to partner with India to create something substantive.
Right. In terms of the strategic partnership between India and Israel, where do you see that headed in coming years?
Well, I think that we are going to see it expanding, because our economies not only enjoy the fact that we have, we are ancient peoples, young states that share values, but we also complement each other. Israel is a very small country, but with a lot of technological prowess, and India is a huge country that also has technological capabilities. So we can partner to create solutions that will be competitive also in third markets. And this is being done as we speak. Many Israeli companies are investing in India now. We've seen strategic investments from India in Israel, including the purchase of the Haifa port by Adani Group and other initiatives that we are seeing in innovation, in textiles, in agriculture, and now increasingly, hopefully, also in the field of infrastructure.
Right. Few questions on the Hezbollah before I let you go, because there's a lot of interest surrounding the Hezbollah after what we've recently seen. Now, given that there's been a recent elimination of Ibrahim Mohammad Kabisi, the commander of Hezbollah's missiles and rockets force in an Israeli airstrike in Beirut, how does Israel assess the current threat posed by Hezbollah, particularly with Hassan Nasrallah, who's the Secretary General, who's still alive?
Yeah, well, when you analyze violent threats, you have to look at two things: capabilities and intentions. Okay? So on the one hand, we have a challenge to neutralize the capabilities, and we've been hitting these capabilities very hard. We believe that we've been able to strike tens of thousands of missiles out of a stockpile that is approximately 200,000, okay? And we've been also targeting the leaders of Hezbollah because we want to change their intentions, and we want to instill in them the fear that is necessary in order to deter them from continuing firing at Israel. We achieved that in 2006, and we hope to achieve it for a longer term now.
Right. Also, in terms of Israel and Lebanon specifically, it's not the first time that you would be going to a war, or you're seeing the escalation. You've seen what's happened in the 60s, for instance. And the larger question is this, that we have seen, despite the Israel having pushed PLO out, the country's witnessed the birth of another enemy in South Lebanon, that is, of course, Hezbollah. How is the situation different from what it was earlier?
Well, paradoxically, we have a situation which we have no territorial dispute with Lebanon. But this country has been taken hostage by Iran through the Shiite minority that Hezbollah controls now, okay? So the nature of the threat has changed. And we have to combine a set of efforts that are both military but also diplomatic. And we wish, in order to create a situation that our military action is not necessary, that more and more countries in the world will unite to put pressure on the Iranian regime to change its policies towards our region.
Right. We've also seen, of course, Israel is a democratic country in that sense, so people are free to protest. And we've seen protests take place, and protests particularly after the recovery of 6 hostages' bodies by the Israeli forces. There are those who are looking at those images, and a thought that's approaching them is whether the government, whether President Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu should, in fact, at some level or the other, change his approach. Is a question that some are also asking, because there is some amount of public outrage as well when you see the bodies of hostages come out in the public domain such as this. What is your view on this?
Well, this is natural. You know, in a democracy, you have people, especially, of course, the families of the hostages, and we all as citizens identify with them and their suffering. Of course, they are protesting, and this is something very natural in a democracy. Yeah, sometimes our enemies, because they lack freedom, they misread the situation in Israel. They think that because of the fact that we are free and people demonstrate that we are weaker, but it's the contrary. Actually, this freedom is what makes Israel stronger.
Ambassador Reuven Azar, thank you so much for joining us here in the studio and speaking to us so candidly about the situation in the Middle East and what Israel's expectations are. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The News Hour at 10 will be right back after the break.